I must say I'm disappointed with the defense policy update. There's no sense of urgency here. We've got war waging in Ukraine. We just witnessed Iran attack Israel last night. We have seen war throughout the Middle East and in the Red Sea. And we are witnessing a powder keg that's about to explode in the South China Sea and the Strait of Taiwan. And yet all the promises that you're making and the explorations that you're doing doesn't happen until really after the next election. So in typical Liberal fashion, it's dithering, it's delays, it's kick the can down the road. We're hearing stories about our troops using food banks and relying on food donations. You said yourself that the recruitment and retention crisis put the Canadian Armed Forces in a death spiral. You have said that we're short 6,700 military housing units right now, and we have troops that are living in their cars, they're living rough, they're living in tent cities, and we hear those stories all the time. So, you look at the media that cover the DPU, the titles are, New Liberal Defense Policy, in no hurry to face dangerous global realities. Don't be fooled, Trudeau doesn't care about defense in the National Post. Globe and Mail is our outdated defense policy. Canada isn't prepared for today's threats. It just goes on and on that, Globe and Mail also had one. Canada's new defense policy commits to exploring instead of committing. So I think when you look at what academics are saying, what military experts are saying, what the news are saying, is that there's a lack of seriousness here in the defense policy update. So my question to you, that Minister Anand in 2022, when she kicked off the DPU, said that there was going to be aggressive options to get Canada to 2% of GDP spending to meet the NATO commitment. And there's no commitment in this DPU. Why?
Yeah, thanks very much, James, and for sharing some of those newspaper headlines. I think you missed a couple. In particular, I'd point out the one today in today's Globe and Mail, where they interviewed the Chief of Defense, who I think spoke very strongly about the value of this policy update. But rather than debate those things, I would just simply remind you that this investment, and this investment's layered on the work that we did with Strong, Secure, and Engaged, which actually raised defense spending over an 8-year period by nearly 70%. And what this will result in by 2029 is from the very dark days of 2014, the last days in which you were a parliamentary secretary of defense, where defense spending, where defense spending actually fell below 1% of GDP. This will result cumulatively in almost a tripling of our defense spending, and I think what we've been able to demonstrate is a strong, upward trajectory of defense spending
in the time that we were in
days.
Government. I'm very proud of our record in supporting our troops. We never had troops lined up at food banks. We never had troops living rough. We never had our international allies say they can't depend on Canada. That's all on this Liberal government. That is not on previous government. And so let's talk about the housing, because you have put in here, you say $300 million, but there's only $8 million that's committed to housing at this point in time, and there is $0 committed for this fiscal year. There's $0 committed in the DPU for next fiscal year. You said we're 6,700 homes short for our troops, and we know that over the last 2 years that National Defense only built 38 homes in 2 years. That isn't going to close a gap in 6,700 homes, nor will the $300 million get us there.
Great question. So let me share with you some of the things we're doing. And you may have heard our housing minister has already announced that we are investing not only money into the building of affordable rental housing for Canadians, which will include members of the armed forces, but we're going to leverage the value of some of the property that the National Defense Department currently holds, so that we are already in very important discussions with municipalities and with private industries to form public-private partnerships to get housing built rapidly. There are a number of really important initiatives, and I know we're all looking forward, and I'm sure you are, to the budget that will be released released on Tuesday, which will create, I think, we'll be able to reveal a real urgent sense of getting housing built. There are real opportunities for members of the Canadian Armed Forces. We've consulted with them. I've been to those bases. We've heard them very clearly about what they need, and we're responding to that with not just an investment of money, but new approaches to getting it done.
In the last minute that I have here, there is in the DPU a commitment to replacing our aging Victoria-class submarines. It says conventional subs. The Prime Minister at the announcement last week said that nuclear subs are also an option. Can you explain the contradiction between the DPU and the Minister? And are we going to go ahead with purchasing submarines that can go under ice to patrol our Arctic when you look at the proliferation of submarines around the world, and protect our coastlines from all three sides to ensure that we are protected here and know what's happening in our Arctic waters?
Yes, we are going.
How much?
What's that?
How much is it going to cost?
Well, and that's actually the work that's underway. When we said we're exploring the work that needs to be done, we're working with the Royal Canadian Navy and the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence to determine what their operational requirements are. And as the Prime Minister indicated in his remarks last Monday, nothing's off the table. We're going to listen to them. And we're also working with our allies. We'll also then explore what's the best way to respond to that. But the Prime Minister has been very clear. The document makes clear. We're going to do it because Canada's national defence requires it.
Thank you.
Explore. Explore shows up a total of 12 times in the new defence policy update. 9 of those are promises. Given that it has been about 7 years since the last publication of Strong, Secure and Engaged, what have you and the Ministry been doing the entire time?
Actually, we've been delivering from the Canadian Armed Forces. Just in the last 2 years alone, we've completed contracts for over 100 aircraft, for example, that the Royal Canadian Air Force required. That's the largest and most significant delivery of capability for our Canadian Armed Forces since the Second World War.
Can you acknowledge how much of the Strong, Secure and Engaged has yet to be spent?
I don't know how. A question perhaps better put to our finance people.
Okay, in fact,
but for example,
yeah.
We've signed contracts for multi-mission aircraft, the Poseidon 8s, that will all be delivered in 2026. That's SSE money that will be spent in total.
Okay, so let's talk lapsed funding then. So D&D funding keeps lapsing despite you specifically promising that it's not going to. Can you acknowledge that? Or
and perhaps I could help you with a better understanding of what lapse is. If it takes time. No, but it doesn't mean it's gone. I think that's what we need to be clear. It doesn't mean the money just somehow disappears. It's if the contract can't be completed in one fiscal year and goes over our fiscal year, the department's able to lapse it and then apply it into the following fiscal year to complete that contract. So lapsing is, I think, a reflection of sometimes how long our procurement processes and delivery processes, and that there's many factors that could be associated to that, and we could talk about them individually if you like.
Lapsed funding has been repurposed.
What's that?
How much lapsed funding has been repurposed?
Well, again, a question better asked of our finance people, but certainly in my experience, the money that couldn't be spent in one fiscal year is being quickly applied into expenditure the following year as contracts come online.
Okay, maybe I can acknowledge a comment from, respectfully, General Eyre with regards to $8.1 billion overall being committed by the government to defence spending over the next 5 years falls short of the NATO commitment. You mentioned in your opening remarks that the DPU is a comprehensive new plan and we need to do more and we will meet the moment. Can you address how that is meeting the moment?
We're making very significant new investments in defence. We're spending money as efficiently and effectively as is possible, given our existing procurement processes. We're also re-examining our procurement processes to make them better fit for purpose and to meet the moment, as I've said. We're working with our allies and with industry. We've listened to them very carefully. They told us what they needed in order to hold up their end of ensuring that we can acquire, for example, the munitions and the ammunition that our armed forces require, the battle decisive ammunition. We've heard them. We've budgeted the money. We're now able. We have the resource that they said they needed to invest in their industry, but also to offer them long-term contracts.
Okay, thank you. Also, in the promises in the DPU, we will streamline the security clearance process to reduce the time it takes for new recruits to move into their positions. If I recall correctly, last year General Eyre suggested that the CAF has more than enough applicants. The issue is in processing. they're not being screened quickly enough. So what changes are expected to make this able to happen faster?
So
How can we facilitate this?
I've got some great news on that. I was briefed just this past week on some great work that's being done by the Canadian Armed Forces and the Department of National Defence to digitize the application process. Canadians will be able to do it on their phones. That will not be better for the applicant, but it also provides a digital record of the application that will enable us to initiate processes far more efficiently in getting those security background checks done and to move through those applications. Frankly, if you don't go fast, we lose the opportunity.
So more specifically then,
those opportunities.
How will this be speeding up screening work vis-a-vis security requirements, and how is this going to change? And will the screening be outsourced? I have a lot of questions because there's not a lot of clarity to this. Will other department security allowances transit over to the CAF? Will the requirements be lowered? Will CAF be prioritized over other departments when it comes to processing security clearances? What's this going to look like?
Yeah, a couple of things that I think can be very helpful there. First of all, we understand when someone's coming in for basic training and we're treating them how to march and to shoot and putting a uniform on them and deploying them into some pretty basic functions, they don't need the highest secret security clearances. That can come later on in the process. Additionally, we recognize that the implementation of a probationary period, because one of the challenges, we don't want to onboard somebody who might represent a risk, but if we are able to determine the level of risk before we deploy them into a sensitive area, it just makes more sense to do it in a more efficient and timely way. One thing I want to assure Canadians and you is that we're not going to compromise our standards for members of the Canadian Armed Forces. We're just going to apply those standards far more efficiently so that we can onboard people who want to serve as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Minister, on December 7th, you were at committee and spoke of the shortage and the low production numbers for artillery shells. You said that there was a commitment for increasing fourfold the production in Canada. You told me at the end of that meeting, you said that would take place this year. When will the newly produced shells be rolling off Canadian production lines?
As quickly as Canadian industry can produce them, but they have told us...
You said this year.
What I told them is Canada would do its part this year. We've now committed $300 million, and we're working with industry to make the necessary investments that industry said they required, and we now have the money to negotiate the long-term contracts, which was also the certainty that industry said that they required.
That's great for announcements. On what date this year will the production target be hit of a fourfold increase?
Okay. Last Monday, Canada announced the money that will allow industry to now move forward. And now there is work that will take place between the Department of National Defence and industry. I've also engaged with the ISED minister to move on that as quickly as possible. But Canada did what Canada needed to do, and now we'll work with industry to deliver that.
Are you walking back the answer that you made then that it would take place this year?
Again, to be really clear, I said we would take action to cause that to happen, and we've taken that action to cause that to happen. We're now going to work with industry so that they can deliver.
Canada is the only NATO country that's not meeting both the NATO investment pledges, the 2% of GDP on defense spending, and at least 20% of the defense budget on equipment and research and development. We're the only NATO country not making it. Why does this DPU not address that lack of commitment?
Yeah, thanks all. First of all, under this DPU, that beginning next year and every year thereafter, we'll be meeting the 20% commitment for investment in capital expenditure. I would also point out, as I mentioned earlier, in Canada, we do not publish our aspirations. We publish our funded plans. And this document talks about the money that we'll be committing in this upcoming budget in order to bring that forward. I've spoken to our allies. All of them want to continue to encourage us to meet the 2% requirement, but all of them have acknowledged...
I have to stop you, Minister. Your entire policy update is aspirational. It's full of exploring options. It's full of reaffirming existing commitments. There are actually very few policy changes in this policy update, unless you hadn't been considering the management of all of these priorities all along. This entire thing is an exercise in aspiration. There are no tangible outcomes that can be measured by dates and specific dollar amounts, other than far down the road, far after another election. So, Minister, this defense update cannot possibly be characterized as anything other than an aspirational document?
Well, $8.1 billion isn't aspirational. It's a budget. And it's got clear plans for when expenditures can be made. Now, I cannot, and frankly, I have some very serious doubts whether any other government would ever make the same type of investment in defense, because your record speaks for itself. But what I can tell you is that this is a funded plan that has real dollars and real investments. It has been well received by industry that told us they needed that clarity and certainty, and we've provided it. It's been well received by our allies who see a very strong upward trajectory of defense spending, and they're tripling of defense budgets by our Canadian government since the last time another government was responsible for defense spending. And so there is a real clear plan. And if you didn't see it here, I'd invite you to go back and read it again.
We're running out of time, Minister. One more question, just as a reminder for people about the detachment between announcement and reality. On January 10th, your government announced that January 10th, 2023, they announced they would purchase a NASAM system for Ukraine worth $406 million. 1 year ago last week, your predecessor falsely claimed that system was en route. This was an announcement. These are claims that you make about expenditure, but they haven't happened. Could you tell me on what date will that system be delivered?
Yeah, I can share with you what Ambassador Cohen and the U.S. Department of Defense has shared with us. In order to deliver that system to Ukraine, Canada we already provided all the missiles and systems that we had available to us, but we had to acquire.
Why did the predecessor mislead Canadians then and say it was en route?
Mr. Kelly, did you want an answer to your question?
Well, you're not answering it.